They say that history is written by victors. And many people accept this statement without question. It's a familiar phrase we've heard many times, and sometimes maybe repeat ourselves. But is it always true? Can you think of an example where, rather than celebrating those who win, we honor the memory of those who lost, the oppressed, the victims? I'm sure that several examples come to mind to you now. And I would like to argue that Jewish history, or the story we tell about Jewish people, is often an example when history is written by those who lost, who were oppressed and persecuted. Tonight and tomorrow, we will be celebrating Passover, and in the next week as well, celebrating Passover and telling our friends and families the story of not how we won a battle, but a story about how we were slaves. How in every generation there is someone who wants to destroy us. The Jewish story is not always the story of winners, but yet we are here. And we are proud of who we are. So imagine if you were a leader of a group or a country who lost a war, a battle or a struggle for freedom. What would you want to tell your children? What would you want future generations to remember about you? I guess you would want them to know that you are not defined by your losses. Quite the opposite. You learn from them and realize that you are more than a piece of land or a building. You are who you are because of how you define yourself, not because others defined you. This week's Torah portion, I think, provides an example of a tradition that defines what it means to be Jewish. It has a story that describes the laws of mincha, the daily meal or grain offering in the ancient temple, a handful of a flour mixed with oil burnt on the altar, but the remainder of the flour that was brought to the temple but was not burnt, it was eaten by priests as matzah, as unleavened cakes. So why matzah? Why matzah? What meaning does matzah have? It reminds us of the Jewish people's slavery in Egypt. And that's the origin story of this piece of bread for us. After hundreds of years of slavery, hundreds of years, we were liberated and had to flee very quickly without time to prepare and bake bread. It takes hours, sometimes days, to prepare a loaf of bread. Taking instead the simplest form of food, matzah. This symbol connects us to the past, bringing to life the moment our ancestors transitioned from slavery to freedom. And I know in many countries around the world, there is this tradition of eating the food that our ancestors had and often during the difficult times. I grew up in Russia, and I remember eating this horrible bread in May. The bread that the generations of war had to eat during the war times and after. And I remember that was the moment of commemoration, eating the food that our ancestors ate. And this is what we do with matzah, exactly the same. Matzah is not nice. It is dry, and it's not nice. It's not what I would have chosen to eat. But I do it for a reason. So indeed, the Exodus from Egypt, this story is the central story to Jewish tradition. woven deeply into our daily prayers and Shabbat liturgy, and most prominently celebrated during Pesach. Even during the temple times, as we just saw, they had this symbol in the daily ritual. They daily reminded themselves of what it was like to be slaves or to live quickly. The tradition preserved the symbol of rushed escape from slavery. Why? Why do we keep talking about this difficult and far from glorious past? Why couldn't we preserve the taste of manna, for example, the taste of this miraculous food and nourishment during the liberation times? Why couldn't we preserve something nicer? But we have matzah. So Rabbi Daniel Hartman is one of the leading intellectuals about in modern Judaism, wrote a book years ago about who we are, who are the Jews, and who can we become. And in it, he introduced this idea of Exodus people. Hartman outlines two foundational stories of Jewish people and two identities that all Jewish people have in the world. One is called Genesis Judaism, and the other is called Exodus Judaism. And he argues that we need both. So what is this Genesis and Exodus Judaisms? The story of Genesis is the origin story of Jewish family. It's about the beginning and the growth of our family, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, the family that was rich, that was successful, and gave birth to many generations of what we call today the Jewish people. Genesis is the story of success. Genesis Judaism centers on belonging and unconditional identity. It says that being Jewish is being part of a family. And you don't choose it, but the family doesn't choose you. It accepts you. You are part of it, full stop. It's about community, being Jewish because of who you are and to whom you belong. Having Genesis identity, you observe traditions and rituals as a part of your natural identity, as a part of who you are. I do certain things because my parents did it, and therefore I do the same. I do certain things because this is who I am. In contrast, the story of Exodus, especially its beginning, can hardly ever be called a success. It begins with hundreds of years of slavery. We were slaves, we were oppressed, we could not break free ourselves. We needed an intervention to break our chains. Even after the liberation, the story is full of failures and unpleasantness. The book of Exodus is a constant chain of complaints, mistakes, and conflicts. People are stubborn, arrogant, and very difficult to manage. Probably nothing changed. But this is the story of Exodus. The book of Exodus, and indeed many other moments in Jewish history throughout the ages, is an example of a history written by losers. It emphasizes not the glorious past, but the lessons we learned from traumas and from our mistakes. Therefore, Exodus Judaism is not about being part of a successful family or something. Exodus Judaism emphasizes responsibility, ethics, and action. It's about moral commitments. Exodus identity commands us to act ethically because our ancestors knew what it means to be oppressed. The Exodus demands us to look beyond ourselves. We often say, because our ancestors were slaves, I must help those who suffer oppression today. Because my ancestors were refugees, I must help refugees now. Because so many of my ancestors, or our ancestors in the past and today, were immigrants, wandering Jews without a clear sense of home, we know what it is to have a complex notion of home. And therefore, we must help and welcome immigrants today. These are just a few examples of what it means to have this Exodus identity. Hartman argues that we need both, that Genesis and Exodus are not in conflict. They must balance each other. If Genesis Judaism dominates, we become complacent and we have dangerous nationalism, defining our Jewishness only through tribal affiliation, without ethical responsibility. I am better because I belong to something better. It's not enough. Therefore, if Exodus Judaism is the only identity you have, you are arrogant. You harshly judge people by who is good and who is bad because of what they do. And we have examples of both in the modern world. Therefore, we need both. We need the sense of unconditional belonging and the sense of ethical responsibility for this world. So what does it mean to be Jewish today? It means belonging to something far greater than oneself, something ancient, enduring, and unconditionally accepting, to be Genesis Jews. This identity anchors us, helps us to provide hope, and offers stability and comfort across millennia. Whatever happens, you will always be a part of an old, wise, and great story of success. However, Jewishness is not only about pride and stability. Being Jewish demands responsibility, the duty to use your gift of life with purpose, to help those less fortunate, to stand by the vulnerable, and to actively challenge oppression whenever and wherever it exists. Being Jewish today means balancing two important ideas, belonging and acting. Genesis gives us roots. It offers a sense of family, history, and community. Exodus encourages us to stand up for justice, kindness, and doing what's right. Today's world is often described as post-truth, where it's hard to know what's real, and many people and leaders have no shame in telling half-truths or straight lies, including our own leaders. People often feel disillusioned and do not believe that justice exists. Jewish identity gives us something really powerful. Judaism teaches us that truth matters. It reminds us that caring for others isn't optional, and that compassion and justice should never be compromised. Living your life with values of truth, justice, and compassion is really hard. Finding it takes a lot of time and resources. It's much easier to only care about yourself. But it doesn't mean that the just and fair world is impossible. Jewish task in today's world is to be an example of morality in the world without shame. Jewish task in today's world is to pursue justice, fairness, and equity in a world of strong hands and self-serving leaders. Jewish task in today's world is to show compassion, kindness, and support to the most vulnerable, even when everyone else looks the other way. Yes, history is often said to be written by winners, but Jewish history shows us something unique. Our stories are written by those who show strength in tough times, humility when they succeed, and wisdom learned from lost battles. This is how Daniel Hartman wrote, what Daniel Hartman wrote at the end of his book. And this is how I'm ending this sermon today. At the end, he asked, so why being Jewish today? Here's what he says. As a Jew, my story tells me of my responsibilities to my people and requires that I be a blessing to all humankind. Period. Is it a good enough answer? Can belonging to this story add meaning and value to your life? Is it a story worth being told? And he doesn't give the answer to this one. But I do. It is for me, and I hope it can be for many others. Shabbat Shalom.